Hello and welcome back to another episode of Nick Tiffany's Movie Reviews, coming at you online and in print format at nicktiffany.com, in podcast form, wherever you get your podcasts, and even video on YouTube. And of course, you can find us on our socials at NT Movie Reviews. It's been a few months since you've probably seen or heard from me. Playing a little movie and TV catch up here recently, shifting industries and completely changing jobs and having to actually study for exams and tests and licenses and all these fun things. It's definitely taken a considerable amount of time and dedication to do. So that meant kind of cutting down on the frequency of the movies and whatnot, which is not a bad thing. You know, it's giving me plenty to play catch up on. I don't have to make as many theater trips. There's a lot streaming. There's a lot, especially leading into the holidays, to talk about. So I'm not going to waste too much of your time, and I just kind of want to jump into it. It's going to be a little more stream of conscious. I've been playing TV catch up or keeping up with TV more recently. We've got newer Star Wars release with the Skeleton Crew. You've got James Gunn's Creature Commandos now on HBO Max. You've also got Dune Prophecy. There's a few other things I kind of want to touch on. I'm going to get through more comic book-y slash maybe even documentary in this episode. This will be a little more focused on kind of a review roundup. We'll get to some more of the dramatic films. There's more than a few things I've seen recently that you're going to hear about. But for now, we'll keep it light. We'll keep it breezy. We'll start with Disney. You know, Disney's easy. Skeleton Crew is the latest TV series from Disney and Lucasfilms. The latest in the Star Wars entry. Most of the series helmed by John Watts, who most of you will probably know from the more recent Tom Holland Spider-Man series. Skeleton Crew has been compared to the Goonies. It's essentially this young cast who eventually end up off planet by way of a few certain discoveries, and they need to find their way back home. They're out in the galaxy all on their own. They're going to face pirates. They're going to face evil dangers. There is a childlike aspect to the show that is pre-built, unlike a lot of the other Star Wars shows, which has kind of been something that maybe has kept me from enjoying some of the other properties as much. Obi-Wan being one that really balanced between, all right, we're hanging out with young Princess Leia and Luke, and then we're going to have your more mature tones with Obi-Wan and Anakin. And so I was hoping at least it would pick a lane. And so Skeleton Crew definitely picks a lane. This is definitely a more childlike show. It's not saying that adults won't enjoy it. It's not saying that I didn't enjoy it. There's certainly tons of fun to be had watching this. I'm curious to see it develop and kind of build those stakes in a sense of, I don't think they're going to go full Andy Muschietti and give us it where you're like really terrified for this kids. If it went that route, I would love it. But kind of positioning them as our entry into this story, I think is a clever idea. And I think the story that they're kind of setting up, this grand mystery, another mystery within the Star Wars universe, it's pretty fun. It's something that feels a little bit different. It's something that could lead to a pretty great conflict. Jude Law is just popped up kind of in the second episode. I don't really know what his vibe is, and they're really trying to bury the lead. Is he a Jedi? Is he a Sith? We don't know. We're going to find out, though. The one thing I will say about Skeleton Crew is some of the scenes, again, I don't know what it is with Disney, or maybe it's just the cameras people are using, but there's a whole scene between the two young leads while they're waiting for the bus, and they're doing a little fake lightsaber duel, and it just looks like it's a Target ad. And I feel like people know what I mean when I say that, or what people mean when you read that online, when someone's like, yeah, this was shot like it was a commercial, from the lighting to just how not fake everything looks around it. But there's this aspect of, oh, like, yeah, you could actually slap some sweaters on these kids, and it's the Old Navy winter classic event. And I believe it. It's a Star Wars merch co-op. I would buy it. So I don't know. It's not to rag on them too much. I think 2 episodes in, it's certainly building a little bit of intrigue, but I'm curious to see where this 3rd episode takes it, because that's kind of when you hit that make or break. If your first 2 episodes don't really blow you away, I don't know. It can be tough. That's kind of where you lose that audience. And so they're shorter, which is kind of nice as well. But I don't know. Skeleton Crew, if you're a Star Wars diehard, you're going to watch it. Uh, Again, because it knows what it is, it's not surprising that it's more childlike. And if you go in with that mentality and you go in knowing that, you'll probably enjoy it for what it is. For some of those callbacks, like Goonies, there's really not a ton that's like Goonies in this, but you know how people on the internet are. They're like, oh, this follows a very basic, similar plot structure. It's just like Goonies, but in space. So be it. But speaking of needing to have a strong 2-episode intro, James Gunn, he and Peter Safran, the co-CEOs of DC Studios, bringing us a new Superman film next summer, without Henry Cavill, of course. Uh, the first project that was greenlit, now I'll give James Gunn the benefit of the doubt here, after the mega success that was Peacemaker on HBO Max. Not HBO, but HBO Max or Max Originals. We don't really have they don't really give you the numbers. You can't really see the numbers. We're just going to believe that it was a massive success. So big that they're like, hey, what if you just redid the Suicide Squad for a third time? You already redid the Suicide Squad once in a movie. But what if you did that with cartoon characters? And essentially, Amanda Waller is up against the wall. You're kind of bringing in aspects of Peacemaker. You're bringing in aspects of James Gunn's Suicide Squad, leaving out all of the rest of the DC universe that we've come to know before then, because we're getting this hard reboot. I'm going to call it a soft reboot, actually, because we're keeping James Gunn's characters, and then, of course, adding new ones and friends of his to the mix. Creature Commandos. You're following Rick Flag Sr., played by Frank Grillo, who, if you're not on social media, this guy is just beating the James Gunn drum for the DC universe. Every day there's a new article from him talking something about it. But he's Rick Flag Sr. There's a new enemy, a new magic enemy. We can't use people anymore for a Suicide Squad. That's where Amanda Waller's like, well, we're just going to do Task Force M instead. And we'll use monsters who really aren't technically people. So you've got a Nazi-killing robot who only wants to kill Nazis, and it's his prime directive. That's all he talks about and jokes about. The shtick kind of gets old pretty quick, but James Gunn is nothing if not committed to the weirdos and telling the lesser stories in these comic book universes. The Weasel's back because you got to keep Sean Gunn on the payroll one way or another. He also plays another character in the TV show, though. But each actor's only gonna have one role in the DCU. But when you're the boss, you can change your rules as you go, and that's it. Is what it is. Alan Tudyk's playing Dr. Phosphorus, Clayface. I think at least one other character. It's the simple James Gunn formula: ragtag group of misfits, all with their own deeply troubled emotional pasts. And you're going to kind of touch on all of those and see how they work together. Tons of adult humor. There was nudity in this comic. Maybe I haven't watched all the other DC rated R animated ones, but I was like, okay, all right, James Gunn. Okay, sure. I don't know. I felt like the first episode was like 20 minutes and then it was done. And it was like, okay, that was it. All right, episode 2. This better be a killer. There were a few chuckles. I don't know. The Bride of Frankenstein is certainly a fascinating character, and that more than anything is probably what will draw me to watch it again. But it just feels pretty by the numbers for James Gunn at this point, and it feels safe. By no means do I think this is supposed to be the launch for the DCU. Obviously, Superman is going to be the start of everything, but these characters will pop up in live action. And so that's this whole concept going on here. Can you bring animation to live action and go back and forth, delve into video games and tie in all these things? They're really trying to move away from a disconnected universe. But there's also this idea that, Zack Snyder and the former DC crew mapped out a decade's worth of movies and lore and everything. And this is pretty par for the course. And just earlier today, I was reading actually that they're getting ready to move with Sergeant Rock, directed by Luca Guadagnino, and maybe even starring Daniel Craig, which just is like an interesting choice, I guess. Sergeant Rock, again, not a character that anybody would say, yeah, who's bankable? Captain Rock. Luca Guadagnino, I don't know how bankable he is, but obviously he's a fantastic and talented director. Obviously did Challengers this year, which is one of my favorite films for sure. But it just, in an age where Warner Brothers is struggling for money, where they are just hurting, they're losing billions of dollars, consistently losing top products to rivals, just struggling in earnings calls, everything, the pressure is on. Superman has to be a huge hit. And so when it comes to what projects are we going to greenlight, Sergeant Rock or another Wonder Woman movie? I don't know, you guys. I think everybody would tell you that Wonder Woman would be the obvious choice. Women have actually been telling us that for a while as well. But, they don't have, they might have plans for Wonder Woman, but it's down the line. We're going to have to wait. But, we'll get Swamp Thing from James Mangold, maybe. Maybe we'll get The Brave and the Bold from Andy Muschietti with Batman and all his Robins. The future's murky. They're shelving a couple projects. Maybe not shelving, but they're shutting down or slowing the roll on more than a few projects. And so I think they're going to really have to be quite selective with the films that they choose to bankroll. They've got to see those returns. Traditionally, Superman films, they don't perform like a Batman movie. And this is going to be your launch. So there's a lot riding on this. So Creature Commandos, I'm not going to tie it, I'm not going to compare it to Superman. I think they're completely different properties, how they're handled, how they're watched, who they're made for. But obviously you can't help but feel in your gut. I just hope that in Superman, I hope that it's just not too jokey or too Guardians of the Galaxy or too Suicide Squad and Creature Commando-y. I really hope that we focus on Superman and Lois. And, James Gunn said, this is not an ensemble film. And I love people online who are like, dude, he's Superman. He's going to have friends who are superheroes. So they're not supporting characters. It's not like they're part of the film. But then, when Zack Snyder has 2 or 3 heroes in a movie, they're like, dude, we need a backstory for everybody. Like, we need multiple movies and things. It just, it's ironic. It's funny to watch. I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. The Green Lantern series coming to HBO. Very excited for that. You put Damon Lindelof in anything, I'm there. And Green Lantern is a great property, and I've been waiting for a live-action Jon Stewart for a long time. So that'll be great. Creature Commandos remains to be seen. Not bad by any means, but again, doesn't reinvent the wheel. It's fine. It's fine so far. I was a little underwhelmed, unfortunately, actually. Have even watched like a few Harley Quinn episodes. It's like, those are funnier than this, interestingly. And, people are like, oh, but the heartstrings, and we're not there yet. These 2 episodes, we're not there. But I don't know. We'll see this week. I will tune in for episode 3. The other show that I've kind of started on, I've only watched the first couple episodes of as well, is Dune Prophecy. Dune 2 being another top film of mine for this year. Now, Denis Villeneuve, maybe outside of producing, really doesn't have any attachment to this series. And talking to my sister, these are scripts, characters. A lot of this is based on stuff that the original author didn't write, but his son wrote many years later. So I know I've been reading online, there's some discrepancy over what should be considered canon and what's real and what's not. But the idea of the film, we're set place 10,000 years or so before Paul Atreides rises up and heads to Arrakis to become the Lisan al-Gaib, which I haven't heard that phrase enough, actually, this year. I hope that should be the phrase of the year, actually, is Lisan al-Gaib. But Dune Prophecy goes all the way back to 2 Harkonnen sisters who are essentially carrying on the traditions of the Bene Gesserit and really starting to plan out these, generations worth of royal pairings, this selective breeding, trying to create Kwisatz Haderach. And, the first episode, there's a lot to set up, for the uninitiated, for people who are kind of privy to the Dune world, but don't totally know. I think it does a decent enough job kind of catching you up to speed. Here's the Emperor. Here's what he controls. You get an idea of what spice is worth or why it's important. And you're like, damn, 10,000 years ago, and you guys are still fighting over sand on Arrakis. You guys are still losing to the Fremen. what happened in 10,000 years that they're just sending people in to get slaughtered? But outside of that, you do kind of get this backstory of technology that was banned, or why these different nations, or why these different families, these royal families and bloodlines have moved out further into the cosmos. This ban on this almost artificial intelligent like beings. So I don't know. They're laying the groundwork for some very interesting concepts. And of course, they kind of touch on the voice that, kind of parcel tongue hiss to give the, put the drink down. The mindless, oh, I'm just going to go put it down. You touch on a little bit of those beginnings, and it's interesting. And then they really do kind of delve into this whole selective process of how they train the Bene Gesserits and how you'll be selected to serve alongside which royal leaders to try to guide them. And it's just this incredible amount of puppeteering going on from above that, I don't know. The first couple episodes, it was like, all right. The first episode especially, it was like, okay, interesting enough. I will watch part 2 because there's enough that I still enjoy about the franchise that I'm curious to see how they handle. You can't go into it thinking that it's going to be on the level of quality that the movies are, because Denis Villeneuve just is on a completely other level. But I think it is a quality companion piece, at least right now. For those who are itching for a little more Dune but don't maybe want to read through the hundreds of pages or the multiple sets of books, I think it does fill enough in the background that it's like, okay, so I will keep tuning in. But Dune Prophecy, if you've got Max, you can check that out, and you can check out Creature Commandos, Skeleton Crew on Disney. Keeping in the animation realm, Watchmen Chapter 2, which is just the animated version of the comic book of the graphic novel, which, I don't feel like part 1 was that long ago. And for some reason, I thought part 2 was going to be a 2025 release, but maybe they kind of bumped that up just to really, really make way for Superman and whatnot. But Watchmen Chapter 2, I enjoyed more than I did the first part, than the first chapter. I think, they really do try to stay close to what the graphic novel is. And it does offer some slight variations from what Zack Snyder did in live action. There were certain artistic liberties that you take when making a live action movie versus making an animated adaptation. And for telling a story that a broad audience can understand as well, whether you're changing, is this some crazy space alien that lands in New York and kills these people? Or are we using the tachyons from Dr. Manhattan to eviscerate people and make the world think that he is actually challenging the world? So there were multiple moments that were refreshing, having read the graphic novel and being as big a fan of Zack Snyder's Watchmen film and the director's cut as I am. It was cool to see some of those differences. And I think it was also cool that the animation looks very much like how it looked in the graphic novel. Night Owl doesn't look nearly as cool as he does in real life, but I think they do a terrific job of keeping those characters looking and feeling like they belong in that time, especially. I think the voice acting still leaves, for me personally, a little bit left to be desired. Especially, Rorschach's really trying his hardest to sound like Jackie, but I don't know. It was fine. I was intrigued enough, and there was enough that kept me interested. I knew the story, and I knew the beats, how they kind of weave in the pirate's tale, the shipwreck tale is interesting. Does it all work? Sure. It's a little boring compared to the live action, but again, maybe that's because it is a stricter comic adaptation. I don't know. I think this exists for people who don't want to go full-fledged and just delve into the world where people are getting fingers shot off and there's blood and bones popping out, and watching Rorschach just get blasted and his entrails are blasted everywhere in the blood and the snow. Not that that doesn't happen in the animated version, but of course it looks far less gruesome. But I don't know. This is where watching it again just kind of had me thinking of the movie the entire time, of the live action movie, and I was like, that was a pretty tough scene, or like that was like pretty hardcore actually. So I don't know, it gives me an appreciation for both the graphic novel and I think the live action film again. I think maybe it's a little more accessible if you are not into an overt amount of graphic violence and blood and sexuality. But other than adding a few key scenes kind of back, and I don't know if it adds enough different to be like, yeah, we needed this. It justifies the existence because the live action one left so much out or was just so vastly different that we had to make this one. So I don't know. I thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. Still a big fan of Watchmen. I'd be curious to see if they ever do the Doomsday Clock event, kind of crossover with the Watchmen property in DC. That could be curious. That would be something that I think, especially in animated form, would thrive right now, because I don't know if James Gunn and them have any plan to bring Dr. Manhattan into the fold with that. That he feels like a character that belongs in Zack Snyder's DC universe. He'd be there with Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill. That feels more fitting for that world. But the last animated, this is kind of, we'll cap it with a couple documentaries. I don't even know if this one's really a documentary. It is a Lego movie. It's called Piece by Piece. And it is the story of Pharrell Williams, how he grew up in Virginia Beach, growing up, producing and making music, kind of tracking through his life, essentially, how he became the person he is today. And I'm always game for, music documentaries, 9 times out of 10 are going to be more entertaining than any other kind of documentary. That's just the way it is. Anytime you're getting that background, or like a film documentary, if you're kind of a nerd like I am, you want to know the process. The players, the jobs, what it all looks like in the final product. But to watch that behind the scenes, to get that glimpse into where the magic happens, is just so refreshing. And Pharrell is such an interesting character. When I think of him, and I love that they did it in the film, I think of his crazy hats, whether they're really tall or just multicolored. I think of his fashion. And as someone who has always admired Kanye West and his whole foray into the fashion industry, the clothing he creates, the clothing he wore, the changes that he brought, Pharrell, until now, I didn't realize was a few years older than Kanye and was just a little bit further ahead of him at the time. Kanye, I've listened to some deals, taking some inspiration from Pharrell. He's like, dude, you're wearing polos around Crips and Bloods and all these people, but you're authentically yourself. And you were continually pushing all these boundaries with fashion, with music. He's got this funky kind of rock sound that he creates, and you listen to a lot of the early Neptunes and even Nerd work, and there is this kind of sort of rock and roll vibe to it. But he could just as easily go out and create Holla Back Girl for Gwen Stefani, or he could go create songs, Drop It Like It's Hot for Snoop Dogg. And just the versatility that he possesses and how his mind works is fascinating. And so to tell the story, I get kind of being shy. I'm sure they shot a decent amount of it in person, in real life. And then we're like, nah. He's like, let's make this Legos. Because how are you going to tell the story of how my mind works and how I see things when I listen to music? And to bring in these, to recreate some of these situations, to really authentically tell that story while using the voices of these people. So, everybody's in this. Pusha T, Timbaland, Missy Elliott. You got Justin Timberlake. You've got everybody, Busta Rhymes. You've got all these people that he worked with across his career. But it all started in Virginia Beach. And I knew that Pharrell and Timbaland came out of Virginia Beach. I knew there was a great series on Netflix, the Hip Hop Evolution, kind of touching on how hip hop and rap evolved all over the country. And Texas rap and hip hop sounds different from Atlanta rap and hip hop, which sounds different than what's going on in New York with Jay-Z and these guys, or Biggie. And then you got what's happening in LA on the West Coast. And so they touch on all these deals, but they did an episode on super producers and these people who they rap, they sing, they're making songs for themselves, they're making songs for other people. And they touched on Kanye, and then they touched on Timbaland and Pharrell, 2 guys who came out of Virginia Beach who just had such refreshing, funky sounds. When you listen, I'm like, Pharrell, anytime you hear that 4-count repeat or 4-count beat, it's him. Timbaland's got crazy drum production. And, as you cycle through their songs, it's like these guys were everywhere. So I knew they were both from Virginia Beach, but what I didn't know was that they went to high school together with Missy Elliott, with Pusha T, and this whole crew practicing after school, skipping class in middle school and high school, making music together. It's just awesome. It is so cool to see how tight knit they were, and it's like, dude, these guys were teenagers producing beats, trying to get themselves out there. And it's one of those things maybe that as I get older, things get put into perspective when I look at these young athletes or people where it's like, this kid's like 22 in the NFL and he's playing alongside 30 and 40-year-olds, or this, how do you hold your own against some of these greats? And it is that duality of the greats are great because they've had this time, because they've established themselves, but they need the young guy to kind of help keeping them great. And so you see, just kind of like Kanye, people for a while, Pharrell, we're going to pay you for beats, we're going to keep you around, but we're not really going to give you the chance to be your own artist. And so it's cool listening to how he meets his buddy Chad, who formed the Neptunes together in school, and just this idea of sharing this love of music and how they see it, how it moves them and affects them, just creating the most unique sounds that just did not exist at the time. And, because Pharrell is such a quirky individual, there's so much personality imbued in this film. And using the Legos, you can be so vibrant, you can be so colorful. I watched it on my own and just was so fascinated by it, loved it, that, I was going to watch a different movie with my wife, and I was like, we could, you went kind of a comedy. I'm like, there's aspects of it here. It's a Lego movie, but it's by Lego. And we watched it. I'm like, I watched it the next day, and I was like, this is just as good. The music's incredible. Seeing how many different projects and genres that they touched is unbelievable. And it's like 90 minutes. It's perfect. You could not ask for a better experience in such a short amount of time. And if you have an interest in music, if you're big into hip hop and rap, I think it is completely worthwhile. Even if you got to rent it, I think it's just cool enough to see how all of their influence spread, how people in the industry kind of looked at him, how he was kind of brought up. I loved it. I think there should be more things like this, actually. But it kind of gave me a bigger background into other artists that I enjoyed as well. Watching these early collabs and understanding how some of my favorite albums came to be, or where this kind of sound comes from. It was fascinating. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Whether it's a documentary or not, I'm not really sure. We'll see what the Oscars say, but fantastic movie. Could not recommend it more. And to wrap things up, speaking of a fantastic documentary, just last night, I watched the new Superman documentary, that's Super Dash or Super Slash Man, which is the story of Christopher Reeve. You guys are going to need some tissues. It was hard, very hard to sit there and just not be constantly kind of wiping your eye, listening to the story of perseverance, not only of Christopher Reeve, of his wife, of his family. The man that the world knew as Superman seemed invincible. He seemed impenetrable. He seemed the pinnacle of morality of all these things, when in real life, obviously, like everybody else, he struggled like a real person. He was not what society made him out to be. I mean, overnight, he says something great in the documentary, the world and people. It's not just kids who are looking for superheroes. People are looking for superheroes as adults. You're looking for someone to save you. You are looking for something extraordinary in a world filled with ordinary and filled with mundane. And you just, they do a terrific job of showing what a beacon he became, a beacon of hope. You're going to believe that a man can fly, and just kind of even touching on that aspect of how seriously he took this role. And for being 24 at the time, and I'm like, no, he looks like he's at least in his 30s. I mean, he's like a man. He looks like Superman. It just, God, what a fantastic movie. You get some of the background before his tragic spinal cord injury after being bucked off of a horse. You paint this picture of the life he kind of lives, the physical activity he engages in, what his home life was like and how that kind of affected when he had children, and the sins of the past and of the father you might not want to repeat, but life is cyclical and these things end up happening, and it's incredibly moving. It is incredibly raw and just wears its heart on its sleeve. You've got interviews with all of the Reeve children, two of whom, you've got one who is the actual son, William, who's the actual son of Christopher Reeve, and then you've got his, he's got his half brothers as well, half brother and half sister, and you're learning about this foundation that the parents create. You are seeing Christopher Reeve and his preservation after just, I mean, not being able to breathe on your own, and watching this man trying to wean off of the oxygen machine, trying to wean off of these things to prove that he could walk again, to move some of these limbs because he doesn't want to be limited. There's a really interesting, I don't want to say it's a stance that's drawn, but there's this idea of, he really did shine a light on people with disabilities and on what that struggle is like, not only for that person, but how the people around you are affected, how people in the world look at you, or a matter of fact, don't look at you because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to speak to you. They pity you. And he chose to look at his situation, and he openly admits, he said, hey, unlike a lot of these people, I haven't been confined to this chair for my life, but I am disabled, and that is how I'm going to call myself. And there is this idea that, there is something wrong with me, which people in that community, in the disabled community, kind of do take an issue with this idea of there is nothing wrong with me. I am not my disability. I'm not my limitations. But Christopher Reeve constantly wanted to try to do what he could to advance the research for stem cells. That was one of the more interesting things that I didn't know, I guess, was what a huge proponent of stem cell research he was, and really drumming up support for it through Congress, and really trying to put this focus on developing research for that. I had no clue he was as involved with that as he was. But then his paralysis foundation that he forms with his wife, you would think when someone can only move their neck, you kind of get an inner monologue through old recordings of his, of just what his state of mind was as he's in bed in the hospital, looking at all the people he loves, but unable to move. It's heartbreaking. It is inspiring in so many ways, though, too. The stories people share, you really get this background info, too, of his friendship with Robin Williams, and you just see how close these two guys were working in Juilliard together, and how committed they were to their craft, number one, but you see this dependency they kind of had on one another, how they could help each other. And, it really just shines a light on what a remarkable human being Robin Williams was, too. Just what a gift and a treasure he was. But obviously fighting demons, much like at one point in time Christopher Reeve started to fight, but having each other and having that support. I mean, it just watching them, you're watching two people who are effortlessly best friends, who are just genuine in their interactions, making each other smile. As he kind of mentions too, it's like, we never ever talked about the chair. We didn't talk about the disease. Like, we just talked like friends. And so you've got Glenn Close and Susan Sarandon, all these other celebrities who were so close to him, who really were a part of this family network, who took care of him, who took care of the kids, who looked after all these people, who drummed up support to raise millions of dollars in awareness for people with disabilities. The film, it's just a triumph. It really is a roller coaster of emotions in the best way, because again, it does shine a light on something that people aren't overly explorative of, or they don't always want to feel. I think people struggle with, like, oh, I don't want to feel bad, I'm going to learn about this and I'm going to feel sad, or I'm going to watch something and I'm going to feel sad, and I don't want to feel sad because there's so much sadness in the world. And to a degree, I get that, but you watch something like this, you are allowed to feel sad. You are encouraged to feel sad, but then you feel hopeful, and you see why it's important to rally with the people around you and what support means. And you see the difference just one person can make in the lives of so many people. And it is worth all that sadness in the world, because that leads to hope. Without sadness, you don't know what happiness is. And it sounds super cliche as I say this right now, but the story is just unbelievably moving. I did not have a dry eye for most of the film, as I expect most people won't either. But it is just a stunning portrait of a man who never gave up, who was willing to be broken, who was willing to not be okay at times as well, who struggled like so many people in this country do. And he pushed through and he persevered and he created opportunities for people with disabilities as well. I mean, he directed movies after being disabled. I mean, there are just so many things I personally didn't know and then got to see in this film firsthand that just blew me away. And it can't be understated how much of a tool and how incredible hope can be, and why it is something that needs to be kept alive. And this is just essential storytelling too, for the fact that it does raise awareness for people with disabilities, for people who suffer from extreme paralysis, and just creating an awareness too of just taking care, knowing when to listen to your body as well. I mean, there's just so many things that I think we take for granted not take for granted, but I mean, it's hard to justify going to the doctor for something that might feel small, or it feels like I'm gonna have to go spend money to have them tell me, no, there's nothing really that we can do for you. Like, you're just probably experiencing this. And there's this mentality of like, I just don't want to go. I don't want to get checked up. I mean, Randy Moss, I don't totally know what's going on with him. This was just a stream of conscious, something I saw the other day. But he's taken some time away, I believe, for something medical. And he was like, men, you need to go get checkups when you're young, because I have clearly missed something that could have been caught potentially a while back. Your health is wealth, like they say. And so, you've got to take care of yourself. We've got to take care of other people as well. And we need to be good to other people. We need to be accommodating to people. And we need to continue to inspire hope and to continue to rally in support funding that deserves to be, for everything that we can fund in this country. We can take care of the people here, whether they're homeless, whether they're veterans, whether they're disabled. There is a way, and people should continue to keep fighting for this. And I hope this film kind of keeps drumming a lot of that sentiment up, because I think we could use that these days as well. So there you have it. Quick, air quotes, quick rundown of everything that's kind of been at least on my mind recently, or at least what I've been watching recently. No shortage of a recommendation to be had here. But I thank you again for indulging if you've made it this far. It feels really great to be back in the chair and back recording and doing this, as I'm sure you can tell, the tangents just flow like water. But next time you come back, I will have a little more dramatic film recommendations. We're getting into that Oscar movie season, in air quotes again. It's the mad dash of get your film out before December 31st, or put it in one theater in Los Angeles or New York on December 31st so that we can qualify it for next year. So I have no shortage of movies that I'm going through that will likely be players next year. Still got to see Wicked. Still, I haven't seen Moana 1. I don't think I was coming to that realization. But Moana 2 was just printing money. So there's going to be some good catch-up to play. Gladiator 2, stoked to talk about that. But again, that's for another time. Thank you again, as always, for tuning in. You can find us at nicktiffany.com, NT Movie Reviews on all social media networks, podcast platforms. It's good to be back, and it's good to have you listening. Take care, and we'll see you next time.